They liked that he was young, that he was energetic, that he was someone that they saw as a truth teller compared to Cuomo, who was obviously a very damaged candidate.
The epicenter of global capitalism, New York City, has elected a self-styled socialist as its next mayor. And that has naturally soaked up most of the media attention, especially since Zohran Mamdani is young, charismatic, radical, articulate, and loves baiting Donald Trump. But the Democrats, in what was a very good night for them, also scored two other notable victories. They took back the governor's mansion in Virginia and held on to the governorship of New Jersey. They won comfortably in both, even though New Jersey was supposed to be a tight race by 13 points or more. Two women, two centrist Democrat women with national security backgrounds, very different from Mr. Mamdani. And in that difference, you have the coming battle for the future of the Democratic Party, a party which has had very little to cheer about since it was soundly beaten by Donald Trump a year ago, but which now dares to think again after yesterday of revival. The question is, what shape will this revival take? Will it be the radical route chosen by New York's new mayor, or the more traditional Democratic path of the new female governors of Virginia and New Jersey? The momentum is certainly with the Mamdani wing of the Democratic Party. It commands the energy, the freshness, the youth of the insurgent in a party too long dominated by a mediocre gerontocracy. Mr. Mamdani encapsulates all the appeal and all the risk of today's populist left. He's promised a lot of free stuff, from buses to childcare, which always goes down well, especially when folks are struggling with the cost of living. How to pay for the free stuff isn't so clear. As a socialist, the new mayor naturally thinks the rich can cough up more. But the top 1% of New York taxpayers already account for 40% of the city's tax revenues. They might not be minded to fork out more. Friendlier tax climbs are only a domestic flight away. You don't even have to leave the country. Mr. Mamdani may soon be the darling of real estate brokers in Florida and Texas. That's what Donald Trump thinks will happen. He expects the Mamdani administration to be quickly marred in a host of troubles of its own making. The new mayor, a nepo baby of privilege, has never actually run anything or even had a proper job. But yesterday's elections also signaled trouble for President Trump and his MAGA movement, which would do well to realize that the time for MAGA triumphalism is over. The multi-ethnic, multi-generational coalition that gave Trump victory last year started to fray yesterday as Hispanic, black, young voters all began to drift back to the Democratic fold. And if the Democrats are now about to be convulsed by a battle between a new breed of socialist insurgent and the party's most central forces, the MAGA movement suddenly has divisions of its own. It too risks being riven between its traditional supporters, who now seem somewhat mainstream, and a new breed of far-right activists dabbling in fascism. The centre is now a lonely place in American politics. Next year, the country will celebrate its 250th birthday. It will do so when radicals of the populist right and left seem to be making all the running, when the country's political discourse will be bitter, shrill, hyperbolic, unreasonable, intolerant. It's not how the founding fathers perceived their new republic. They were so keen on harmony, they didn't even want political parties. Perhaps the celebrations will be a cause for some healing. We should hope so, but I wouldn't count on it. America looks destined to mark a significant milestone next year, scarred by systemic divisions as deep as any in its recent history. Let's return to those American elections now and speak to Tom Bonier, a veteran Democratic political strategist. He co-founded Clarity Campaign Labs. Tom, let's start with your overview of yesterday's election results. How do you read them?
Well, I think you did a good job in terms of laying out just the depth and the breadth. I think everyone expected Democratic victories, but Republicans had hopes of maybe picking up some of these races. They thought things would be much closer in all of these races, frankly, than they were. They thought maybe they had a chance of winning in New Jersey. They hoped they would win down ballot races. The attorney general race in Virginia was one that I think they were actually confident they would win. And when you look at it, I don't think you can find anything for Republicans to be happy about this morning when you look at the result, all the way down to the local level, losing races in places like Mississippi, one of the most Republican states in the country. It's a bad morning for Republicans.
It is indeed. I agree with that. There may be one bright spot, depending on how you would answer this next question. And it's this: is Zohran Mamdani's victory in New York City, is that good or bad news for the Democrats?
Look, I think it's good news. I think there's been an effort by Republicans, led by Donald Trump, to try to turn this race and to turn Zohran Mamdani into more than it was or he is. And I think we'll see more of that now that he was elected. You know, you saw an interesting dichotomy here where they were saying, on one hand, they hope he wins because they'll make him the face of the Democratic Party. But then Donald Trump really did what he could to try to help Andrew Cuomo defeat him. I don't think they're too happy about him winning, but certainly they will try to paint him as a caricature of the Democratic Party. You know, in reality, he is the mayor of New York City. It is an incredibly important job. We don't want to minimize or trivialize that. But when you look at the election results, and as you said, you look at the candidates who won the governorships in New Jersey and Virginia, very moderate candidates. You look at these other races Democrats won. It really looks like the Democratic Party that was successful 20 years ago, the last time that Democrats were wandering in the wilderness and then ended up taking back Congress in the 2006 midterm elections, where it was a party for everyone. It had, yes, far left progressives, but also moderates and conservatives. And you look at these results, that's really what happened last night. We'll see how that holds going into next year's elections, of course.
Well, as things stand, to whom does the future belong? Democrats like Abigail Spanberger, the new governor of Virginia, she once said that she never wanted to hear Democrats use the word socialist again. Or self-styled socialists like Mr. Mamdani, who's always using the word socialist.
Perhaps all of the above. You know, what Democrats have done well when Democrats have been successful is not hewing just to one label. It's running the right candidates for the right places. New York City is not Kansas or Oklahoma. And Democrats have succeeded, perhaps an understatement, but Democrats have succeeded when they've been able to run candidates who match and represent well the communities that they run in. And for Mamdani, to be clear, I don't think that voters were electing him necessarily because of any type of label, whether it was socialist or socialist Democrat or Democrat, period, because obviously he did hew a little bit more to the middle after he won the primary election. They liked that he was young, that he was energetic, that he was someone that they saw as a truth teller compared to Cuomo, who was obviously a very damaged candidate, and then Curtis Lee, the Republican candidate, who really fell apart at the end and I think finished in single digits. So the future belongs to all of them, or at least if Democrats are going to be successful in the midterm elections next year and the next presidential election in 2028, that's how we're going to win.
I mean, he was certainly a breath of fresh air, and, you know, the Democratic leadership has looked like a pretty useless gerontocracy for quite a while now. He came in and seemed to be, it was younger, he had a different message, and so on. People like that, even if they didn't listen too closely to his socialist message. You mentioned, you know, that being mayor of New York is a very important position. It's also a really difficult position. I spent a lot of time in New York. It's a city with real troubles at the moment. It's got a lot of problems. The danger is that this man, a Nepo baby who's never run anything in his life, he crashes and burns. That's the risk.
Yeah, certainly. No, he's got a very big job in front of him, and we'll see how he does. And, you know, you mentioned the troubles in New York City. This is a country, to be clear, with substantial troubles at the moment. And Donald Trump is not doing a lot to help there in terms of what is happening with the economy. Republicans ran in 2024 on lowering the cost of living. And what we've seen is its economic policy, if you can call it that, has resulted in higher inflation. And so that hits places like New York as hard as it does anywhere. And so, yes, it's a very difficult position for these newly elected Democratic leaders, including now Mayor-elect Mamdani, to be able to do something within that context of, they can't change tariffs. They can't change tariff policy. They have to deal with that. And so certainly it's going to be a very difficult job and a steep hill for him to climb.
I was struck how, whether it was the more centrist candidates or the more socialist candidates, that they had one common theme, which was the cost of living, which seems to resonate. And that seemed to be a big problem for the Republicans. People are hurting, and the prices in New York, of course, are astronomical. Don't know how anybody in an average salary can survive there. But let me ask you a wider question. The Trump MAGA movement mounted a successful hostile takeover of the Republican Party. It's now in charge. What are the chances of the populist left, which now has the bit between its teeth, doing the same to the Democrats?
A lot of people have been talking about exactly that, or even going back to the so-called Tea Party movement that took over the Republican Party, that was sort of the precursor and the foundation for Donald Trump to
didn't quite take it over. It was important, but didn't quite take it over.
Absolutely, it was a bit of a foundation for Trump to run and win in 2016, and so I don't see that happening with the Democratic Party again. When you look at the candidates that were nominated and won around the country, it was really diverse. Politically, ideology, demographically. That's generally been the history with the Democratic Party. And so certainly we will see the primary election will be important. But generally, the Democratic primary electorate doesn't tend to be quite as progressive as some of these caricatures would suggest. Yes. And so, I'm not saying that that's impossible, but I don't view that as likely at the moment.
Well, it's certainly fascinating going forward. And Tom, thank you for coming on to Times Radio and giving us your take on that. That's Tom Bonier from the United States.